What the fourth industrial revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities.
Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. I have Whitney Webb joining me today for another one of our just deep, all over the place conversations about whatever else is going on around the world today. Actually, more specific today about a few very important things. But I love connecting with Whitney for that exact reason, because we can just riff and talk and get into all sorts of random things going on. Because, you know, in my opinion, as you well know, she's probably one of the most immersed in a lot of these topics today. So we're going to today talk about something that she recently, and one of her writers on Unlimited Hangout also wrote together about Tanzania, something that I have talked about, but haven't really dove into, that it's very interesting about what really happened with that, with the leader that was discussing COVID-19 and the doubts there. And then suddenly the guy dies and the story, you know, just moves on as if it's something different, but apparently it's more in regard to a possible coup. Interesting, because we've talked about coups and regime changes a lot on this channel. We're also going to talk about where Whitney just left, which is Chile, and how that ties into the larger picture, and about how as I've been saying from the beginning, let's put it this way, that foreign policy seems to be very, very much connected with everything that's happening today. And we're also going to talk about the fourth industrial revolution and some stuff that she's currently working on now. So Whitney, always a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, it's great to be back after a long interlude.
It is.
So hi, yay.
Well, you're a big star now over on the Tim Dillon show, I hear, over there, just regular.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate Tim having me on. Honestly, in terms of you know, content creators with that size of a platform, out of the people at that tier, I guess, that have had me on before or once or whatever, Tim's the only one that'll still have me on.
Good for him.
Even though he constantly thinks every time he puts an episode with me up, he's going to get like censored or his YouTube channel deleted, he still does it. Tells you that well, he has, you know, even though he's a comedian, right, and makes like jokes about a lot of different stuff, you know, he has a lot of integrity that I think is absent even now on a lot of independent media outlets. So it's really refreshing to see someone using their platform, you know, to talk about, you know, these issues, specifically technocracy related stuff. Because, you know, some of the big topics that he wanted to cover, you know, vaccine passports and stuff like that. You know, there's a lot of agendas that, you know, obviously you've covered and I've covered that go, you know, that are totally connected to that. And that it's not just about a vaccine, and you know, the agenda for that has been being, you know, set up for years before and all of this stuff. So it was really nice to be able to, you know, get some of that information out to a bigger audience. So thanks, Tim Dillon.
Right. Yeah. For him for taking that, you know, your point on that's correct. The integrity is obvious, but it tends to be overlooked because of the comedic aspect to it. You know, he's taking a lot of risk by having you on. And the reason I said that joking in the beginning is because people are pointing that out. Like Whitney's becoming a regular occurrence on that show. It's just good. You know, it's nice to see that there are people out there that are willing to get that information going. And it also shows you that it's, you know, whether it's a Tim Dillon show or not, this information is pushing its way into some very mainstream circles. And to your point, maybe, you know, I think we said this before we went live, but that the whole vaccine passport is, you know, kind of woken up a lot of normies or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Well, I called them normies. I was like, did you see how many normies are waking up? I mean, yeah, but that's just how, you know, I like to talk with friends.
Lots about what's going on. And you're right. You know, they're mainstream, you're following, you know, listening. You know, they just don't understand. And this thing has broken through a lot, and it scares them, you know. We didn't plan on talking about that, but in a sense, we're on it. If you want to talk a bit about that, you know, you can reference the article you wrote about that in the past. We've both been talking quite a bit about the vaccine passport issue. Maybe just briefly, you know, do you see that time before we get to Chile? Because you just left Chile in general, and that they're becoming the technocratic authoritarian control network that we're seeing everywhere else, you know, starting with the authoritarianism. So have you seen that already in Chile? Are they rolling out some sort of vaccine passport initiative, or how?
Yeah, well, the way they're doing it in Chile is different. So it's not based on your COVID test results or your vaccine. It's all through the police. It was never about vaccines. From the very beginning, you have to go through the website or a special website the Chilean police set up, and you have to go and you have to enter all your information, where you're going, how long it's going to be. They give you a permit for 2 hours. You can only get 2 of those permits a week, so a total of 4 hours out of your house on different days during the week. And you have to show that QR code or certificate you get through the police website to be able to enter any point of business, really, that's allowed to be open now in Chile, including grocery stores. So, they have gone the other route with having it be state required, as opposed to, directly related from the off with vaccines and other stuff. And that's because Chile has been the pilot for this, because they've been doing this since like April of last year, through the police, before there was vaccines and all of the stuff. And now most of the population is really acclimated to it, which is really unfortunate. Very little pushback within Chile. Of course, I would argue that a lot of that goes back to the Pinochet era. You have the people that were young adults or younger during that period of time that saw what happened and don't like to rock the boat. And a lot of the stuff being enforced in Chile right now is now being done by soldiers, with giant guns and stuff. When I left Chile at the airports, people with giant guns and camo everywhere. It's pretty unreal. And checkpoints in between towns and cities. They've really locked it down really good. And it doesn't, it's not even tied with the vaccines at all. Actually, what they're doing, Chile is actually supposed to be one of the world leaders in vaccine rollout. And so this shows this extreme lockdown they've declared now, which is honestly just, we can talk a little bit about how crazy that is. They have so many people vaccinated, like more than half of all adults in Chile are supposed to be like vaccinated now, and they're already locking it down like this. So obviously, like, if you think the vaccine is your return to freedom, as Tony Blair said, and all of this stuff, your route to liberty or whatever he said, it's not. They're going to keep moving the goalposts, and they've already done it in Chile, and they're saying this will happen next in the UK.
Yeah, isn't that just this is the part that I continually am just baffled about. Like, you're watching the opposite of what they keep telling you. Like, the vaccine will give freedom back to new normal. And then we see places that have like 90% vaccinations, and no, they're still masking, they're still locked down, they're still in quarantine. I just don't get the disconnect there. But it's interesting though that you see this pushed. It's martial law, right? From the way Chile's doing it. In the US, let's say it's about manipulation and coercion. But to that point you made about the foreign policy, do you think that's just a part of why they've conducted these sanctions, these aggressive manipulation campaigns against foreign countries like Yemen or all of South America? So now these new generations are like, we know what they do. If we don't play ball, they'll make us all starve to death, right? So, Like, your point, it seems like they're willing to just passively take what comes because they know if they resist, they'll death.
But it's a little more than that too. So Chile, for decades, ever since Pinochet was installed, had been used as a test bed for Western policies. So like neoliberalism, for example, it was like the test bed of neoliberalism. That's why when those protests erupted in Chile in 2019, they said neoliberalism was born here and it will die here, and stuff like that, right? So in terms of why this new lockdown was declared in Chile, there's a couple different reasons. One is because they wanted to delay elections that were supposed to take place in mid-April. They pushed them to May. And in my opinion, they're going to keep pushing them because this is the election that would basically annul the dictatorship era constitution and replace it with something different, which would obviously mean that the current president would have less power, most likely, if this were to go through. It's worth pointing out that the current president of Chile is the brother of Pinochet's finance minister. So this is definitely like an interconnected blob of fun people that are involved in this. But in terms of, there's a lot of different things at play in Chile right now. So one is, I've talked about this, I think, a little bit before. And if you listen to my most recent podcast, you'll probably know this too. The specific region where I was living in Chile is about to be declared a terror zone. They're about to declare martial law there. And so even though the existing lockdown in Chile basically is martial law for all intents and purposes, basically what this declaration would do, it would establish something called like an estado de sitio, which is the Spanish term for it. That's basically like in practice martial law, suspension of constitutional rights. The reason they're doing this is because of a alleged conflict between Chilean citizens and the Mapuches, who are the indigenous people of Chile. And this particular region has the highest concentration of Mapuche in Chile. And basically they want to get around, in my opinion, and from my experience living there, they want to get around the indigenous land laws because they want to mine the tract of the Andes that, the Mapuche have ownership over. And because of existing land laws, if a corporation offers a Mapuche person who owns land where they want to build a mine millions of dollars, the Mapuche can't sell to them. They can only sell to another member of the Mapuche nation. So basically, if you declare all of this and you say that the Mapuches are all terrorists, which is the narrative they've been setting up, then you can go in and just seize their assets. And basically, a lot of the copper mines in the north of Chile, some of them are about to run out of copper, and they've discovered gold and different other things in the mountains down there. So this is ultimately a war on domestic terror that they'll be basically beta testing, I guess, stuff that they want to do in the US maybe at some point in terms of the technology side of that. But it's really a resource grab, and they really need all of Chile to be totally locked down in order to facilitate that. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that rose up in 2019, tending to be sort of left-leaning progressive types in Chilean politics, have really bought the COVID narrative hook, line, and sinker. And so have allowed their political enemy, the current president of Chile, sort of aligned with the Pinochet type people. They've allowed him to really do whatever he wants. And it's really only going to get worse unless people start saying enough. And we'll see. But basically, and I mentioned this to you before we started, Ryan, if I hadn't left Chile when I did, I wouldn't be able to leave now. You are unable to leave Chile if you are a foreign resident or a Chilean citizen. If I were to go back with my daughter, who is a Chilean citizen, we wouldn't be allowed in unless we stayed in a government quarantine hotel for 5 days. And if we tested positive, we'd be sent against our will to some sort of hospital or government facility until they decide to free us. I mean, it's really next level. And the fact that you can't, you can only leave for a couple hours a week. You're not supposed, you can't even buy non-essential goods online and have them delivered to your house. Women are unable to buy birth control pills and like pads and stuff because they're deemed non-essential. I mean, this is like, this is just the recent stuff, but it's really out of control.
If any of those things were happening in adversarial countries, they would be losing their minds about it. Women can't get birth control. They would make a huge, CNN would make a thing about it. It's just, it's the overlap is what I want people to think about. And all these things you just laid out right there, it's just, it's the same old clumsy narrative everywhere that they go. And it's so, we're talking about the same concepts here. First of all, the overlap between domestic terrorism and how you're talking about it's like a, pilot program that they constantly, we can see that happening. But more so the deep embedded ideas they have, the indigenous people, like turning them, like just look at places like Bolivia or places like Palestine or Venezuela, where you can clearly see these class wars in the same way happening. And they're just stealing from the people and turning it on them and making them the terrorists. And it's just frustrating how obvious and clumsy this is. Why do you think they keep using the same old name? I mean, how is it possible that every single part of these indigenous groups that happen to own resources all are domestic terrorists, fighting the government for the freedom people? Or it's just silly. Why do you think
in Chile, I think part of it has to do with the fact that the media landscape is so different than it is in the US or the UK or the English-speaking world, I guess, where there's a pretty vibrant alternative or independent media scene. In Chile, that's really not existent. Most people get their news from the television, which is like 2 oligarch-owned channels from like the 5 or 7 oligarch families that own everything in Chile, and then state TV, and then CNN Chile. So between all of those, you're really just going to get the same narrative all the time, and that's pretty much what happens. In terms of alternative media, most of it, from what I've seen and that people share and consume there, that like falls in that category, are like English translation or Spanish translations of sort of like QAnon light pro-Trump stuff. So I mean, it's unfortunate. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it tells you something that's what's being populated elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's a coincidence, really. Right. I mean, because there's certain people that fund that in the U.S., right? So if they want to expand that message beyond the English language, they will do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you had mentioned the Bolivia as a comparison to this, and again, that's one of the obvious overlaps, right? The idea that we've seen, the same idea with the indigenous people essentially being overruled by foreign powers, right? Where they voted
right.
Even though we know now as a matter of fact that was a manipulated scenario. They lied about the election. MIT proved that basically in their study of all of this. So what do you see the similarities here in regard to why it's happening, the resource connection, and how it ties to the larger picture?
Okay, so I think in terms of parallels, Bolivia is more similar to what happened sort of recently in Tanzania, with the exception that Tanzania's president is dead, and that didn't happen in Bolivia's case. But the whole election fraud, and there's no proof of it, and it's coming from Western-backed or funded organizations or individuals. And then there's this, push for an overthrow, and National Endowment for Democracy funded opposition groups getting rowdy and all of that, between Bolivia and Tanzania. Right. So those parallels and those two situations are really clear. With Chile, it's different because Piñera, who's the current president of Chile, isn't being challenged really, or for in an election. He can't run for re-election again. This is his second time being Chile's president. Sorry, I think the first time was during the George W. Bush era. Was when he was president the first time. And he's gone along with the agenda to such a degree that is just really astounding when you consider just some of the stuff I was talking about. I mean, there's a lot more that's been going on too in terms of their policies, like no stimulus checks given to Chileans at all during this entire time. And these extreme excessive lockdowns, you're only allowed to raid your pension fund, your retirement fund. And of course, it's the privatized bullshit pension fund that was set up during the Pinochet era and is the most hated pension system in the world, because it's you basically, your pension is in the hands of basically Wall Street banks who gamble with it, and sometimes they lose it and they're like, whoop, your money's gone, that sucks.
Yeah.
And you're legally obligated by the state to pay into it. So that's totally out of control. So that's basically all Chileans have had this whole time. No daycare. My daughter had to rely on a hourly babysitter since March of last year. And, when they declared lockdown in January, I couldn't even do that because it would have meant dropping my daughter off on Monday morning and then having her somewhere else for 5 nights a week and picking her up on Friday just so I could work or something like that. And that, is unrealistic to do. So basically people that are trying to work from home, like me, we're put in this position of, okay, so I basically have to work when my child is asleep, which means when do I sleep? I don't, right? I mean, it's an unsustainable situation. And because Chile's on a red list for the UK, where I am now, I had to be in another country for 2 weeks and not get in a quarantine hotel and all of this stuff. So if you are wondering why I haven't had so much content lately, that's part of it. But hopefully that will change soon because I finally move into a house on Monday. First time having a house in over a month.
Nice.
So it'll be a nice change.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you got the hell out of there before it, completely shut down. Well,
yeah.
So you see this kind of being, so you see this transitioning to what we're about to see in the United States. Or how do you see that? How do you see the connection?
Well, I actually see the connection with Chile more closely tied to the situation in the UK than the US, because I think the US is too decentralized for them to use Chile as an effective test bed for everything. I think maybe some states maybe, but you have sort of a patchwork thing going on in the US. And I think, a lot of these different policy pushes, but specifically smart cities, they're going to be focused sort of in city state or more localized areas, which is why you're seeing these tech oligarchs announce that they're making their own cities in various places, and that Nevada law and stuff like that. So I think it's going to play out a little differently in the US, and vaccine passports are in some states, but not others. So the UK is smaller. right? So I think they're able to sort of use it more as a model than the US can, in that sense. But with the UK, right, they also have a really high vaccination rate. It's pretty much right up there with Chile. They're you know, pretty close together in that metric. And
yeah, we tend to see these be kind of, you know, the Australia, New Zealand in the same way, sort of kind of
right.
See that happening first before it comes to the United States. You're right. It's interesting that's, before you go forward, do you think that has to do with the US people and their, I guess, counter establishment mentality to a degree, that's more decentralized, or how do you see that?
I'm not really sure, but before I forget, the point I wanted to make about the parallel is that with the vaccination rates is that they're locking down Chile, saying, oh, we reopened too fast despite the vaccination thing, and people weren't following the rules despite being vaccinated, and look what's happened. That's the narrative they've set up. And now they're already saying that's going to happen in the UK. They're like, look at Chile, it'll happen, because the UK is about to start opening up and easing, and they're trying to fearmonger and be like, well, if we reopen too much or don't use vaccine passports, which are super unpopular here and stuff like that, there's going to be a new surge in June or July. And they're already using this example of Chile in the media as this will happen to us. You better obey. And, you know, the new UK policy is you had to take 2 COVID tests a week, everyone in the country, in order to ensure freedom comes back or whatever, right? So it's like, comply with this or you will be locked down. And I think what we're going to be seeing is what happened in Chile, that the successive lockdowns from here on out are going to be stricter and stricter each time. And they're just going to really push people to see what they'll take. And in Chile, they'll take a freaking lot. It's really sad. And you know, you get a lot of harassment on the street if you're not like wearing a mask and stuff, and you're outside, or your kid's not. I mean, it's really next level. And even like in the UK, right, everyone, it's really crazy for me. Everyone outside is like unmasked pretty much. And in Chile, it's like everyone wears it. Everyone follows the rules. Not really any questioning of anything there.
I don't see the logic. What's the rationalization for saying that if you don't do this exactly the way that we're telling you to, that this will continue to get worse? Aren't they telling us vaccines will stop this from spreading? Aren't they telling you masks will stop this from happening? Like, what's their logic there?
Well, they're moving the goalpost, right. You know, and this is what they were always going to do. And I really hope, it looks like people are starting to see it finally. But I mean, you know, it's not, you know, 3 weeks to flatten the curve and all this stuff was how it started. And look where the heck we are now, dude. And okay, vaccine passports in the UK, they're saying just for a year. I mean, anyone that believes that is you know, needs to put the drugs down. Well, basically.
On that PCR point, or the testing point, this is something I also picked. I saw this today, and this person, I just love the way they broke this down. You can see for those listening, it says someone's getting rich. And this is remember also the conversation I just had about the ethylene oxide. There is even their own documentation admits the residue is left, right? And they argue it's below the ability to make you sick, but we also pointed out that it builds up in your body, right? So the more you're tested, the more this has a potential to, one of the things they pointed out, increase the risk of miscarriages or you know, that kind of stuff. It's interesting. But anyway, as it says, 2 tests a week for 52 weeks. 67.61 million residents at 25 pounds a test will cost the UK 175 billion, 786 million, right? This is massive, massive profit. Remember that person in the US, or where I believe it was like a state government that left the government to open like a PCR testing outfit, right? These people clearly see the writing on the wall and that there's a lot of profit to be made. I think this was the one here in regard to the announcement. Yeah, this BBC, rapid test to be offered twice weekly. Now, the point is, though, it says offered, right? But as we know, these tests are already being implemented along with the vaccine passport, and you have to get one every 48 hours, or
yeah.
The antigen test, it's every 3 hours. Just what, any thoughts on that? Because I'm blown away by how quickly we shifted into that, despite the fact that we still know the PCR test is wrong.
I mean, none of this is about actually doing what they say this is about. A lot of it has to do with enrichment of their pals that have these contracts. It's obviously been a repeated scandal for the, you know, Matt Hancock, who's like the UK minister or health minister. And, you know, a couple other scandals as well, because they know also that, like, you know, the compliance with these tests is going to be really low. The compliance with their existing test and trace program was super, super low. Like pretty much everyone ignored that, apparently, even by the government's own figures. But, basically this testing scheme that they're announcing now would also be tied in with this whole test and trace thing that no one's complying with, and they know it won't change, right? But they have contracts. Palantir is contracted with that, and that particular deal came under fire recently. There was some Freedom of Information Act requests that showed that there were problems with privacy and all of that, and they're just, trying to keep that system alive to justify shelling out millions of dollars to the CIA front company known as Palantir.
Right.
And they're going to keep looking for ways to do that because, this is just a money guzzle and a wealth transfer. A lot of this that's been going on, and, also designed to keep people afraid and, keep following the rules, keep doing stuff. You have to keep doing the carrot and stick approach is going to go on forever. But it's becoming a lot more obvious, that doctor on CNN that was saying, basically like, well, we need to offer incentives to people that have been vaccinated so they can have snazzy privileges that the unvaccinated don't have. And we can have like a real world version of the Sneetches for anyone that's seen that, read that Dr. Seuss book. Well, I guess those books are, that one's not banned yet, but it could be soon.
Yeah, but it's the whole thing is just unbelievable to me. I mean, let's speak on the illusion part of that though, right? So what are your thoughts on the PCR test in general and how it's obviously adding to the illusion? And as we're increasing the testing, like think about it like this, there's obviously a portion of the population that is at least passive enough to allow themselves to be tested repeatedly.
Yeah.
And that's pretty hard split right now, and it's across party lines too, which is crazy. You people that are on both sides that are like, screw this vaccine passport. So if they can increase the testing to twice a week for even just a stagnant grouping of the population, won't that just kind of continually to rotate through them with the illusion if it's constantly,
well, it keeps the numbers up.
You're saying
it keeps the numbers up because there'll be like more false positives, right? I mean, everyone knows the PCR test is unreliable. And from the very beginning of the coronavirus pandemic or whatever, they've been skewed because all these tests that were initially put out or sent to different countries were found to be contaminated with coronavirus before they even arrived. So they were all going to be positive regardless of what sample was put in them.
See, that's two different things.
And that wasn't just the one sent to like Tanzania or whatever, or also to the UK, which came out at the time. Also ones sent out by the CDC at the beginning in the US. So obviously all of that is going to skew those initial numbers from the first wave of the virus. So we don't really have the real numbers. And the other thing, sorry.
Mm-hmm. No, go ahead and finish. I want to make sure people don't forget that point, but go ahead and finish what you're saying.
Okay. Well, the other thing is that the UK is in deep shit with the way they've been reporting COVID numbers, and they're about to get found out. Basically because, if you look at UK media, they say, oh, well, this many coronavirus deaths, and they say that, it's been within 28 days of a positive COVID test, you can list them as being a coronavirus death, even if they're hit by a car or whatever, you can do it that way. So someone sent a Freedom of Information Act request, or FOI in the UK, to the NHS system of hospitals in Plymouth, and asked them how many people died only from COVID without comorbidities or pre-existing conditions or whatever in your hospital system from February 2020 to December 2020. And these people respond and they say, we decided we can't tell you the number because it's too low for us to make public.
Yeah.
Too low.
We were on the show after you sent it to me. So the audience is well aware. And that was, there's 3 other ones in that document you sent me as well that said similar things. And it's just, it's crazy that they're willing to admit, one, that it's lower than 5. Right.
But if you look at the BBC and stuff reporting for that particular area, they list thousands of COVID deaths coming from Plymouth. But if you actually read it, it's less than 5. So there's a huge scam here. And the more people that do these information requests with different hospital systems in the UK, what if they do, a majority of NHS health systems in England or whatever had basically zero death. I mean, the whole scam falls apart. So they need more testing so they can be like, more cases, more false positives, all of this stuff. It's to keep the scam going.
That's the interesting part about that, though, is that they're admitting in that they have legislation that they passed that gives them the ability to be like, nope, we're not going to tell you because it's too low. Why does that make sense unless you're trying to hide something? It's just
because it's probably zero. It's probably zero. If it's under 5 and too low to report, and they don't want to say because they know it's scandalous.
It's crazy. Now, before I forget, excuse me, you said something really interesting right there that I want people not to conflate. That one, we're talking about the admitted, at least on the CDC website, 30% false positive on the PCR test. Now, we've obviously seen more, like I mentioned, Dr. Scoglio, PhD, who's clearly pointed out in his testing live that between 40 and 45 cycle threshold, which they all seem to be using, it's upwards of 95% false positives. But what you said is that, and we covered this as well, that they had tests that went out that were already contaminated and positive. So this is two separate things. And I want people to think about that not only are they using a test that guarantees that you're going to have an inflated number, but then I find it impossible to believe it happened more than once. You have an effort to inflate the numbers even further by making sure that it's just all positive. Now, why would you need to do that? If you had a pandemic, something was happening. Let's just say it's just kind of milquetoast. It's there, but it's not crazy, right? You have something to build off. This seems like they're building from nothing. It seems like you're taking something that's not there, not to imply one way or the other, but just look at the data, right? I mean, it's just staggering how clearly they're manipulating this stuff, combining flu and pneumonia, using a PCR test. Like you said, somebody dies in a motorcycle accident. And yet, even then, the numbers are still kind of like right in the middle. I mean, that seems pretty plainly clear that this is basically anything else. I mean,
then you have the stuff too about California lockdown, Florida didn't.
Right.
The numbers are roughly whatever, it's not that significantly different. Or Texas removes its restrictions and it hasn't imploded and become, doomland or whatever. Mm-hmm. These are all the really obvious things that should be obvious to a lot of people, I think, that are genuinely interested in trying to figure out what's going on, to be like, I guess lockdowns don't work, so why are they still declaring all these new lockdowns? Well, they're saying variants.
Right.
But if you actually remember back to when the variant stuff started, it wasn't about it's deadlier. It was about, per their official whatever, it's more transmissible. Right. So it means more cases. And they were saying, we have to lock down because of the variant, because it's going to cause all these problems in our hospitals and overload hospital capacity and all of this, which didn't happen. And, in the UK, you have that hospital that won't even release the figures. Some of their emergency COVID hospitals they set up cost £65 million and treated 0 people. And I think that was pretty accurate, or that also, happened in the US too, that some of these big, COVID wards set up in warehouses and stuff never treated anybody. I mean, this is not the pandemic they told you it was going to be.
On top of all of that, add the New York City aspect, where we have like 80% of this happening in specifically 3 main nursing homes, right? It's just that just knocks off a huge portion of that. That's a huge portion of the entire country's numbers. There's so many, you put these things all together, it's obviously an illusion. But before we get too far away from the PCR point, because that was an obvious place to segue into the Tanzania discussion.
Yeah.
That is that was one of the first people I saw bring this up, right? There's a few of them standing up, and it was just circus in the media, right? This guy is so ridiculous, and he's a conspiracy theorist, and he's, and there's so many of these false claims coming out. But admittedly, there were a few things he said that were a little weird, but that should.
Well, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and speak on it.
No, I'm not. I totally agree. I mean, he said stuff about COVID that I definitely would not agree with. But as I point out in Jeremy Lafredo, who wrote the article with me, as we point out in the article, this guy in Tanzania had pissed all the world's most powerful people, most powerful corporations off a year or two before COVID. And COVID really looked like it was the last straw, the fact that he wasn't going along with that narrative. And Africa is a huge prize for the 4th Industrial Revolution. I feel like a lot of people may not realize that, but if you go through, the WEF page and their propaganda and whatever, they just talk about Africa constantly, and they talk constantly about the youth of Africa specifically as being, their biggest resource in the 4th Industrial Revolution and all this stuff. For people that read the work of Cory Morningstar, She had a really excellent piece about how Facebook is basically encircling Africa with like fiber optic cables and all this stuff, and it's going to give free Wi-Fi to Africa, but really turn it into a giant like surveillance thing between Facebook and the military and all this stuff. It's wild.
Do you mean people? Are they literally saying the people of Africa are our biggest resource? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, well, I forget the exact quote, but if you go through, they talk about Africa as a continent, and they say, you know, their biggest asset in the new fourth industrial revolution is going to be their youth. Wow. Because they have a high youth population, you know, because the World Economic Forum focuses a lot on the youth specifically. And that's why you see them roll out Greta and people like this. But in sorry, they're specifically interested in mobilizing youth to support their Green New Deals and all the stuff that they want to sell as progressive policies in stakeholder capitalism. We need to get rid of capitalism and make a new economic system. Well, we're not going to make something, you know, but we've planned the new economic system and all this stuff, but they want the youth to support it. They want to put a face of our children, the next generation on their you know, coup attempts and whatever, you know, they're doing right now.
A really big issue with them calling them a resource. Like, I get what you could argue that they're saying, oh, well, we're going to, you know, mobilize the youth, but to call them a resource is a very scary thing to hear from those people. I'm just going to point that out.
Yeah, well, but they say that about all people, you know, to the World Economic Forum, everyone that's not in the Davos crowd is like a little data pleb. They're gonna, you know, and who that they basically view in those terms, you know, expendable automaton types. You know, I mean, these are the same billionaires from the Gilded Age who then viewed their factory workers in much the same light. You know, this was the Rockefellers then, you know, the Rockefellers are involved now. I mean, it's really not that surprising. But this is how they talk. There is a lot of focus on Africa. If you go and you look at this stuff and some of the big tech companies and stuff they're trying to do over there, there's a lot of interest in Africa specifically. But as I point out in the article, Tanzania is particularly strategic because of mineral wealth that is essential to dominating the fourth industrial revolution. Just like Bolivia is for lithium and Chile is for copper. You know, these are some of the most important minerals for the electric vehicle revolution that they want to usher in, and smart cities and a lot of this next generation technology. We're hearing a lot about these chip shortages for essential items and laptops and phones and all of this stuff because they want to readjust and remake supply chains around all of this stuff. And I would argue there's a proxy war going on. We already know it with AI, right? Between China and the West. And that also extends to which side is going to dominate the mineral resources deemed essential for that revolution, because whoever has the most, you know, mineral wealth essential to those technologies can produce more of that technology and sell more of it abroad and become a market leader and become the economic superpower and all of this stuff. It's China versus the U.S.
Right.
or the Five Eyes Alliance, or however you want to look at it.
Let me ask you about China, and we'll come back to Tanzania because I want to get into the actual regime change aspect of that, because I find that's something that my audience was specifically going like, have you looked at this? I want to know about that. But in regard to China, this is interesting because it seems, I find it hard to believe that there can be such an adversarial relationship between China and the United States unless we're just, I mean, it's certainly possible, it doesn't surprise me at all, unless the US government is just wildly incompetent, that we have allowed a situation where China supplies like 90% of the rare earth minerals that the US government desperately needs for its military. Now, that would justify the regime change in Bolivia and the attempted regime change in Venezuela for, you know, lithium and all the things they need. But how did that situation even allow itself to create, you know, my question, I guess, is, do you really believe that China is an adversarial part of that, or do you feel like it's working together for a larger plan? Because it's hard for me to see it one way or the other.
Yeah, I think, you know, at this point, when you're looking at the power elite of China in the US, it's really like a factional power play. They have a lot of the same overarching agenda of where they want to take things at the end of the day. But it's sort of like infighting you'll have between, I don't know, like now with the vaccines, dueling pharmaceutical companies. Right. One wants to dominate them, you know, but it's like mostly friendly competition in a sense. But, you know, they need this narrative of like the foreign enemy, the nation state, in order to take things where they want to take them. They need some sort of global conflict in order to be able to propose and manufacture consent for radical solutions, which of course we know this crowd, the WEF crowd specifically, wants a global governance model of stakeholder capitalism, and all of this stuff, where you won't be one of the stakeholders. Only rich people get to be stakeholders, basically, who make decisions for you. You don't elect them.
Happier, according to all their media.
Yeah.
You own nothing, right? That's all we're getting pummeled with right now.
Right. So, well, I forgot where I was going with that.
My brain jumps off and all these weird, things.
Mm-hmm.
That just makes me laugh. We've talked about that in the past about, telling us what we're thinking. You've never been happier with something that you all don't want. It's just funny to me. But bringing this back to the Tanzania discussion, that is very interesting because it's an obvious counter, somebody who is countering a very big narrative, right? Somebody who's standing up and saying, this is not what it's supposed to be. Somebody who's already been in a position to be, poking the power in the eye, and essentially in the past. So why do you feel that this was more than just well, first of all, give me for those that don't know, what's the story? Did he pass away from natural causes? What happened? And then what do you think actually happened?
Okay, so let me think about the best place to start with this. So, I guess I'll start, basically at the end of February, this guy disappeared for several weeks. And then at the end of that disappearance, they say, oh, he died from heart failure, but that wasn't like he was gone for a person and they, their heart fails and they drop dead. It's a sudden event. So this prolonged period of disappearance is odd. 3 days before his death was announced during this disappearance period, the Council on Foreign Relations said maybe someone from within his party can rise up and take over and take Tanzania in a new direction. And then, of course, you have this the deceased Tanzanian president, his vice president, Samia, I think her name is Zuhulu. Sorry, I'm trying to remember. Comes to power, and she used to work for the UN World Food Program, which is involved in a lot of biometric ID testing right now and has been for several years. And she has attended at least 2 World Economic Forum events and has her profile featured on their website. It's pretty obvious that she's going to be playing ball with these people because she was, praised by Kamala Harris and Tedros from the World Health Organization and all of this stuff. So it remains to be seen what happened. But what's interesting is the day he disappeared, his last public appearance, he had a 180 on a lot of his flouting of the COVID narrative. He started telling people they need to wear masks and acted in ways that were not typical right before. And there's obviously more I can go into too, like a lot of before the disappearance, several think tanks in the US, including the CSIS, which is as deep state as you can get, saying that the Biden administration needed to fund opposition to this president, whose last name is Magufuli, needed to fund him in order to, teach either influence this guy's policies or go the regime change route. You had the Jamestown Foundation, which has former CIA directors on its board and stuff, saying that if this president doesn't leave power or change his policies, there could be civil war.
And so this was
in Tanzania. This was like in January of this year, and then he disappears at the end of February, and then he's gone for 3 weeks. All these rumors about what happened to him. Did he have COVID? Because he denied COVID and all of this stuff, and then it's heart failure at the end. Right. And it's worth pointing out, last year, the president of Burundi, another African country, kicked out the World Health Organization in May 2020, and then also died 3 weeks after that decision of sudden heart failure. And of course, since then, there's been a reversal in policy there. It's just interesting. So that's in terms of, what happened in that particular timeline right before the disappearance and the announcement of his death. But it's important to point out that this guy was challenging people like Bill Gates long before COVID. He kicked out all the genetically modified seed companies and trials, including a trial that was backed specifically by Gates and also partnered with Monsanto, Rockefeller Foundation, USAID, a lot of these groups funding different initiatives that this guy targeted over the years. He had, because obviously Open Society, Open Society foundations, a lot of people know that has been tied to regime change efforts in Ukraine and countries all over the world. And so he was having them actively raided by police. Like, he knew that there were efforts to remove him from power. And if you look back at other things besides his, him sticking it to big ag, he also stuck it to the big oil corporations, the big natural gas corporations, and the biggest mining corporations in the world. And one case I focused on specifically is that he passed this law that was sort of similar to what happened in Bolivia under Evo Morales, where you have the mining sector previously is basically all done by foreign corporations, and the government of that country where the mine is doesn't really have a stake or has a negligible stake in the overall mining project. And under these presidents, you have by law a certain percentage has to be owned by the state, and so it's partnerships between the state and a private mining company. So in the case of Tanzania, the largest ready-to-develop nickel deposit in the world is this place called this mining project called Kabanga Nickel, and it used to be dually owned by Barrick Gold of Canada and Glencore. And basically, this guy revoked the license without any compensation of those companies to this nickel deposit. And in January of this year, right when they were issuing these claims that this guy's got to go, he entered into a partnership with another faction of the mining, with a Norwegian billionaire, not necessarily another mining company, the Tanzanian government. So Glencore and Barrick Gold lose out completely on this nickel deposit. Glencore, of course, a major partner of the World Economic Forum, part of the World Economic Forum's Global Battery Alliance. And, I forget the other one. I think it's called Metal and Mining Blockchain Initiative, or something like that. And of course, Tanzania's nickel deposit that Glencore had owned was going to be a key part of that supply chain that Glencore was going to control on behalf of their partner, the World Economic Forum. It's also worth pointing out, too, as I talked about my Epstein series, Glencore was basically founded by Mark Rich and used as a front for Mossad for decades. And a lot of people think that's still the case, by who they closely associate with and how, in the history of their company, they've only had 2 to 3 presidents, and their first president, the guy that founded it and led it forever, was Mark Rich. He was a U.S. fugitive involved in Iran-Contra financing, a total asset for Israeli intelligence, allowed Glencore profits to be used to finance covert Mossad activity all around the world, including assassinations. So, I mean, obviously this guy messed with the wrong company, or maybe they wanted to send that message. I don't know. But these are not, small fry that he was making really angry really recently. So I think COVID is just, his approach to that is just part of it. But also the way mainstream media talked about his COVID stance has really lacked nuance. Right. I think they focused in on some of the crazier stuff he said, like prayer eliminates COVID and stuff like that, as opposed to him saying, like he didn't want to be part of COVAX, which had the AstraZeneca vaccine, would have the AstraZeneca vaccine be used in Tanzania. He said, we want our regulators want more time to study, this vaccine. We're not convinced of the safety of it yet, so we want to wait and all of this stuff. But, it goes through the mainstream media machine, and he's the anti-vax president. Right. And all of this stuff, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and clearly he was right? I mean, it's, the AstraZeneca, both of us have been censored for talking about this in different ways, and we're clearly being shown to be correct. What's funny to me is that this is a person that, you have 2 different presidents. And first of all, we know that intelligence services have been shown to have things that could simply cause heart attacks. That's not a conspiracy theory anymore. But I find it interesting that we now see the AstraZeneca vaccine causing blood clots and strokes and heart attacks. So maybe the heart attack gun has always just been the AstraZeneca vaccine, and now that's what they're using today for.
That sounds a little conspiratorial, Ryan. I don't know. I think I'm going to have a sip of soda.
I'm going to get censored for that. No, but I mean, but for real though, it's interesting to see that happens in such quick correlation. And your point is, I mean, it's almost ridiculous. This guy's poking the eyes of every single large
Yeah, he really did.
And it's like, okay. But so the point, though, is that it happens at a time when he's clearly countering things that he's now in some ways being shown to be correct on. And I actually wanted to point out the idea about the, prayer and COVID. What I really am frustrated about, as many know, the mainstream media constantly misrepresent things. They do it to Iran all the time. They'll make a statement about, if the U.S. doesn't abide by what it should do, then we will continue our nuclear program. And all they do is go, we're going to continue nuclear, and they just cut out the part with the context. So in this case, I would argue it's most likely him saying that, from a religious standpoint, pray your faith, pray to, that kind of an idea. Anybody religious can understand why that would make sense. But the media, coming from perspective, of course, even a Christian country, if we want to think of it that way, in the United States, and looking at it like he's crazy for saying that, just seems wrong. I mean, it's odd, right, that they would do that. And I just find it obvious that this is a person that's countering something they don't want talked about.
It's not the worst thing he could have said about COVID, but, there, as is pointed out in the article, there's a lot of nuance to what he was actually saying. If you look at the quotes compared to how it was reported by mainstream media, but, by and large, it was him questioning the motives of people like Bill Gates. And, obviously he had reason to know that Bill Gates wasn't really into him. And then, of course, you have The Guardian, which is funded by the Gates Foundation, say we need to rein in Tanzania's anti-vax president not long before he disappears for 3 weeks and then turns up dead. It's really, interesting. I also want to point out the main opposition candidate to the guy, to Magufuli, the guy that just died, is a guy named Tundu Lissu, who's been living in exile in Belgium. I forget for exactly how long, but he's like the Western-backed opposition candidate. And where a lot of the claims about Tanzania in mainstream media, they basically most of the reports coming out in the past year or so have cited him as the main source and the main analyst for Tanzania's presidential politics and stuff. And this guy used to work at the World Resource Institute, which is partnered with the World Economic Forum and is all about mining and all of this stuff. Exactly the same interests that wanted this guy out, because he basically worked to nationalize the mines. And, this is something that happened in Bolivia, too. And before I forget, another factor here that's similar to what happened in Bolivia is actually the China angle. So in terms of the more superficial nation state angle of nation state versus nation state, not what we were talking about a second ago, where you and I both shared the opinion that behind the scenes, China and the U.S. are pretty much on the same agenda. But in mid-December 2020, the Tanzania's president announced that there was going to be a lot of new investment with, and of course, their big resource potential for the fourth industrial revolution means that a lot of those investors are going to go into the mining sector, with Tanzania being the second biggest mining sector in all of Africa. China's been trying to increase its footprint in Africa for several years, and U.S. media have been, fear-mongering about that. But, it is something that has been going on. And if you remember back to right before the coup in Bolivia in 2019, that lithium mine that was later, said to have been why the coup happened, with Elon Musk saying we're going to coup whoever we want, and all of this stuff, the Bolivian government, if I remember correctly, had entered into a partnership with a Chinese firm or a Chinese government backed firm. And then the coup happens after that, because it seems pretty obvious the Western powers don't want these mines to be going to China. They want it to be backed by, the West specifically. And I think that ultimately comes down to what I said earlier, the sort of faction versus faction in the global elite, that, the Chinese elite want, more of a bigger piece of the pie than the West, and vice versa. But they're all, down for this fourth industrial revolution, smart city, technocratic control grid, because they're implementing it in both countries. And to say that's not happening in both countries, I think is kind of naive. Because it's not like a black and white thing really anymore. You have like that level where you're looking at the nation state level, but there's also something above that, that's transnational, that determines, how things operate in the world. And, I think the ultimate structures of power are up there, not necessarily at the nation state level. But you did have him, Magufuli in Tanzania, trying to bring everything closer to China. And a lot of these criticisms that came in a month later in January that talked for funding opposition groups and stuff said that Magufuli was bad for Tanzania because he was stopping foreign direct investment. But it was really foreign direct investment from the West, not China, because he'd announced a month prior that he was courting that specifically from China and Chinese companies. So that's another angle of what was going on here as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, it's obvious there's a lot more happening, and that's the hardest part for some of the people that aren't, they're just in the, they don't really care that much. They pay attention every now and again. To think about that next level concept is just so far outside of their comprehension. And I get it. If never really stepped into that, it's impossible, to think about it like that all these governments that are being elected and the democracies are all being puppeted by larger, to some degree, by people.
Yeah. Well, the narratives we're told all about history and stuff when, we're in the school system and everything, basically don't go they don't really go beyond the nation state versus nation state level of things. It's only when you actually, get into researching for yourself a lot of times that you're going to come across the actual influence of these international or transnational organizations, something like the World Economic Forum, because there's even people now that are like, oh, well, they're not as powerful as you would think. But then if you actually look at the invite lists and like who does what and, how governments interact with the Davos crowd and all of that stuff, it's and what's happening right now with the fourth industrial revolution and all of that stuff and in particular countries, it's pretty clear who's setting at least key parts of the agenda for very powerful factions of the global elite. So I think a lot of it has to do with, how people are brought up and taught to think about the world and how it works. But also, that being reinforced by mainstream media, which, poo-poo any notion of this, transnational global elite type stuff or the factions of that. They try and keep it simple because they don't want people to understand the big picture. They just give them a little piece to focus in on.
Yep, couldn't agree more. I mean, if they wanted us to have the full picture, we would learn about the Federal Reserve in high school. We would learn about the Rockefeller.
Yeah, they'll never do that.
Clearly influenced every part of our history. Even the medical aspect of today, talking about the Flexner Report and Rothschilds and Carnegies.
Well,
if they cared about teaching us the full picture, these people would be a huge part of it. But do you want to comment?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And it's worth pointing out, too, that the Rockefeller Foundation is super involved in this vaccine passport stuff, like Common Pass, set up before COVID, a year before, I think, with the Rockefeller Foundation money. And they're a key partner in ID 2020. And, the whole point of this vaccine credential initiative that they're involved in and all of this stuff, too, is to link biometric identity, health, electronic-based healthcare and economic activity all in one, which is pretty much the clip you open the stream with of Klaus Schwab saying what the fourth industrial revolution is, a merging of all our identities and all of that stuff. He's really hard to listen to, his voice. I mean, he's just so like comically super villain and,
Yeah. Well,
it's like off-putting how it should be, reality TV, but it's not,
right,
Right.
Well, I mean, we've talked about the Converging Technologies document as well as the second edition of that came out in 2017, where they're openly talking about this, where this isn't some analogy. They're literally talking about converging your biological identity with technology. And that's what but if you put that topic head on today, you'll be called a conspiracy theorist, despite them literally laying it out in documentation from your government. It's unbelievable. But to finish this up today, what you were working on something in regard to a new article that you wanted to kind of touch on to wrap this up? Did you want to point some things out?
Sure. Yeah. So I have two upcoming articles. I had been trying to work in, while the move's been going on, because it's been pretty prolonged for various reasons. So I have stuff that's, I have a couple articles that are half finished that should hopefully be out. If not this week, then, I'll get one of them out this week, and probably another one next week. So one is for TLAV, and it's going to be about a lot of these simulations, not about the next pandemic or the current pandemic, but about actually a financial crisis. The same people that did Event 201 have been simulating and making and the Wall Street and all the interested parties how to crash the financial sector, blame a cyber attack, and then reset the economic system and who's going to reset it and what have you. So I'll be having a report out on the details of those simulations, which the first one I actually wrote about previously with Johnny Vedmore on Unlimited Hangout, called Cyber Polygon, which is the World Economic Forum simulation of this scenario with Russia's largest bank, whose CEO is another World Economic Forum member and is set to release their first central bank-backed digital currency. I believe they've already launched it actually, and then but there's since then there've been the World Economic Forum has had other partnerships that have explored this in greater detail, and the stuff they call for is nuts. So one example for those that are interested is that the World Economic Forum in some of these reports about how to prevent the cyber attack, which means after a cyber attack event takes place, it'll be proposed that the solution is to merge the government's diplomatic arms and national security agencies together and combine that with banks. Like, that's a great idea. So basically openly combine Wall Street with the national security apparatus and the diplomacy apparatus, which of course oftentimes is just covert national security agency policy, right? So having the national security state come but have them to call for them to openly become, fused with big private banks is not good. But I think this is part of where, this was always sort of where this was intended to go in a sense. We've talked a lot before about how a lot of these programs after 9/11, total information awareness, have been resurrected now. One of those programs that got shut down alongside total information awareness was this futures market that DARPA was going to run, so you could like gamble and bet on terror attacks when they take place next, and which country is going to have instability next. And obviously, if you work for the CIA, you go and you're like, next week there's going to be a problem in this country, and then the CIA sends someone to that country to make the problem, and then you make like $1 billion. It's just to legalize insider trading by these guys.
Right. Doesn't that?
But if you go, sorry.
No, that's just so incredible to think about. Doesn't that just speak to the larger, like, that's what all of this is? That's showing their hand. That's what they're doing with futures market in general. They're betting, they're then making happen. And it's so incredible to watch and how they're outlining that. I mean, so your point was that's going to happen. They're bringing that up again.
Well, this is what they're calling for as a way to protect the financial sector from cyber attacks. So if the financial sector does get cyber attacked, like they're all saying is going to happen, this is a solution they're going to propose. Because it's already in these reports, and that is next level nuts. But if you know a lot about the history of the CIA, it's sort of like it comes full circle. Like the first director of the CIA, Alan Dulles, used to be a Wall Street lawyer at Sullivan and Cromwell, and in the 1920s, they did coups for corporations before the CIA did coups for corporations. So to really have Wall Street and the CIA become fused, arguably they have been fused to some degree ever since the CIA existed. But now if you're going to make it public, it means you can make the crimes go on in the public sphere, and you can legalize those acts and protect yourself, use the state to protect your criminal activities, and all of this stuff.
Your crime and in a Wall Street level, and because the whole point is you're not accepting the fault, right? The CIA can create a regime change or create some kind of destabilized effort, and we already see them do it, and then they go, no, that was for freedom or whatever, and then
But think about the consequences of this for the war on domestic terror if you merge national security agencies with banks. If you are not on good terms with the national security agencies and they don't like you, and this war on domestic terror gets ramped up, and they're like, conspiracy theorists are a domestic terror threat, and ergo, you have said something negative about the government that we say is not true, so you're a conspiracy theorist. Well, you're a domestic terror threat. You can't have a bank account.
Right. Or it goes digital like they're doing anyway, and then they just turn the switch off. Right. Which is the whole thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's basically why this is so insidious. The vaccine passport thing too, among other reasons, obviously, is this attempt to tie economic activity to it. And the people that develop the protocols for these vaccine passports say, someday you'll need this to rent a car or to go about your business. And they're calling them wallets already. And that should tell you that it's going to be a digital wallet that includes your immunization records and will later be expanded to have your entire electronic health record, not just vaccines. Fun.
Yeah, no, I liked what you said about that on Tim Dillon's show about that it's not just about, we need to already be thinking 3 steps ahead like that. It's not just about vaccines, even though that's what it's on about now, but it's going to broaden out to the social credit score concept coming. And that's
they want you to think, they want to tell the public this is just about vaccines so they can continue to exploit the anti-vaxxer, pro-vax rift and be like, that's what this is about. It's just about the silly anti-vaxxers. Not realizing that the system has already been set up to be much more than vaccines, and that really vaccines is a very small part of the broader system they're looking to implement.
Yes.
And the more focus they can, because I mean, the responses from like normies or whatever you want to call them, right, is that, oh, it's like the yellow fever vaccination for when you go to the Amazon and all of this stuff. It's like not a big deal. Well, if you're like, well, it's not about it's not really about showing proof of immunization. It's about introducing this system that's much more broad than that and is going to be used for domestic use, not traveling to some far remote jungle and things like that. There's a lot of false equivalencies going on there, but the more they can keep it focused on it just being a vaccine system, I mean, the more easily they can use that counter argument, even if it, does have its fallacies. But it does tend to take a stronger hold if everyone's thinking, oh, this is just about the vaccine, as opposed to, no, it's really about biometric identity and linking that to everything that you do. And they've already said that the vaccine passports, oh, no, they're making fake ones and all of this stuff. The only way we can stop the fake ones is to tie your biometric identity to your vaccine credentials. And that's what this is about.
Solution.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So it's going to be a face scan or a fingerprint face, which is I am not a proponent of doing, but I know people that do that. My boyfriend does that, and I give him crap for it.
Out there for a minute. You dropped out there for a second. What did you say? You were saying about face scans, and then it dropped off.
About how a lot of people are used to unlocking, using their face to unlock their phone. Like facial recognition has become really ubiquitous, and people have become really, it's become really normal. It's become normalized to a lot of people. And that is pretty dangerous territory, but they think this is the time now to introduce biometric identity. But once they establish it, it's going to be really hard to undo, which is unfortunate, but hopefully, regardless of how oh, sorry, I'm back. Okay.
Now you're back. Yeah.
If it does end up getting implemented in different areas, at least hopefully it looks like anyway there's enough resistance to this in the US and the UK that people can make communities where they can exist outside of that system. And that's what we really have to do anyway. I mean, even if vaccine passports don't come, the more resilient your local community can be, the better off you're going to be, because they've already said they're going to take down the financial system and all of this stuff. And, we may have gotten some good pushback against the establishment with vaccine passports, but this is not over. Right. And they have a lot more to throw at us, and we need to be ready for that.
I think you stopped. I'm not sure if it's just a cut off here, a delay, but I'll jump in seeing as how it's cut off. But I couldn't agree more with what you just said there. I mean, the real point is that this, we all need to think about, is that this seems like I might have lost you in general. So it's a good place for me to wrap up here. That this is this is only step one, or in regard to the vaccine passport, right? We've talked about 9/11 being the first part of what this is, maybe more than one part there as well. But the idea is that even if we beat as Whitney was saying, even if we successfully stop the vaccine passport agenda, even if we successfully stop the COVID illusion in the biosecurity state, it's only going to happen. This is first try. We've seen them try things in the past, and then we've seen them try it again and try it again and try it again over here and try it again in a different way until finally it squeezes its way in. Right. And that's what we've continued to see from this government and plenty of governments around the world. So as we see this progress and as we see really strong pushback against vaccine passports, let's recognize that they will only try it again and continue to push it in further, because that's the point. And that's how they continue to do this. It looks like Whitney's back here. So let's wrap up and give her the last word. Whitney, I just wrapping up.
Sorry. Thanks. Okay. I appreciate that.
That last point about how, which is exactly what I was thinking when you said that this, whether we stop this or not, they'll just try it again. And we just need to be ready for that. And like you said, build our own counter establishment community, mentality, everything. So thank you for being here, talking about all this. I'm sure we'll have you back on quite soon. Anything else you want to leave us with before we wrap up today?
Well, trying to think, there's a lot going on right now. So it's kind of hard to just pick one thing. But one thing I did bring up on my recent Tim Dillon interview that I really want to underscore to people is you cannot trust polls being promoted by mainstream media, or really the climate that mainstream media is painting for you. We can't follow those like they're actually true. So for one example, recently there was this poll by a polling company called Ipsos Mori in the UK, claiming to show that over like 78% of people in the UK support vaccine passports for basically everything. But then you have this huge pushback that has totally freaked out the ruling government to such a degree that it's clearly not the 20% that oppose that this poll was saying. You look at the polling company, they got over £2 million in funding from Bill Gates. And the guy is part of the World Economic Forum, the CEO of this polling company. So they have, a huge conflict of interest to manufacture consent for that. Polls a lot of times are made to do that. Remember back to the 2016 US election, all the polls are wrong because they wanted to demoralize people that were going to support Trump and try and get some of them to stay home and all this stuff. I mean, it's pretty transparent that that's going on right now too. So what they want is they want to make people that are waking up to this or that want to fight this feel like they're alone and that the odds are so against them, there's no way they can possibly win. So what they need to do to achieve, to make people feel like that is to make people think that they are in fact alone, and they use polls and stories, manipulated stories to give you that impression. Right. And I think if just even on social media, but also like out in the world, who you're interacting with, it's really obvious that a lot of people are starting to ask questions or opposed to vaccine passports in practice, specifically for domestic use. And they're trying to make us think that there are less of us than there really are. So this is really important to keep in mind, that they want you to think that there's less of that we're more of a minority than we really are, and that we're having an impact. We are changing minds. That's why people like Ryan and I were censored on Patreon, because they want us to not continue to give you this information. Obviously, that's not going to work, but it's because we're having an impact. They wouldn't do it if we didn't have some sort of impact. So it's important to keep that in mind, because they really want us to be as demoralized as possible. So it's important to have that little caveat back there in your mind, to keep up the energy up, I guess, because we have a lot farther to go. But I think things are actually looking more positive than bleak at the moment. There is a window that is closing to make change, but I think we can do it if we reach enough people. So hopefully people will start sharing more of this outside of the existing social media platform giants that want to control everything. By the way, my other report that's coming out probably next week is about the ties between Facebook and DARPA, going back very, very long time, and how Facebook was always there to sort of figure out who's going to be a domestic terrorist and who's not, from the very beginning, right? So these platforms are there to, single you out, but also to try and manipulate you. Remember, Facebook had did that study that they were sort of scolded for by mainstream media, even because they were asked and to demoralize them. And this is something.
Well, right when you were about to say what it was, what was the study that they did? And
if tweaking news feeds would negatively affect people's emotions, they were trying to produce negative emotions in users by manipulating their news feed, i.e. trying to demoralize them. This is something that Twitter and Facebook and all these guys do. They want us demoralized. So obviously what we have to do is fight against that. And that is to keep in your mind that a lot of times these polls and opinion pieces and stuff like that do not reflect actual public opinion.
Yep. And that speaks to the false majority that I'm constantly talking about. And I know the community here is familiar with, and it's important to recognize. So thank you for being here, Whitney. Always a pleasure to have you on. And,
absolutely. Thanks.
Yep. And as always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.